Hi everyone, it's Sketcher Fashion Drawing Tutorials. In this video I wanted to focus more on leather and lace, so we're going to render this Valentino look. We're basically here we are going to have this leather bomber, a lace dress and cotton shirt underneath. So we're starting with the face, and just to apply all those nose bridge shadows, I draw the nose bridge with pencil, and I'm using shale for the shadows. So I use shale for a bit darker skin tone if I really want to make it dark. So shale just looks perfect in combination with a tan pro marker. So it's usually good to use two markers for a skin tone. One a bit darker and one is of the same hue but just a different value that is lighter, like tan and satin, shale and tan, patty and almond. Well, depends on the markers that you're using, but the principle is the same. So here I'm using tan and I try to work faster. So while my tan is still wet, I'm applying shale again and it blends. And to blend it even better, I'm applying more of the tan, covering wider area and leaving the highlights just uncolored. So it's just one layer of tan. And showing some like minor details with one layer of tan, like lower eyelid. Adding extra layers where I want it, usually like upper sides of the nose bridge, eyelids. Again, tan just to define the nose bridge. And I'm spreading the shale on any surface. You can use plastic, you can use glass or metal, and then you use tan, mix it like with the shale and apply it, so you get some transitional color without making it too dark as a pure shale, but at the same time not as light as clear tan. So you can mix any colors together. At this point she looks a bit strange because we don't have nostrils, we haven't defined her eye features, so it's fine. Try to mix more, try to take a look at real reference of the images, because you need to feel confident when working with markers. You need to work with markers just as you would do with any paints. So you can really do a lot of cool and interesting things with any tool when you know it. And in order to know it, you have to experiment and be brave. So I applied shale along her jaws. And again, I'm starting working by mixing tan with shale in order to have like really defined neck with all those muscles and any prominent things, but at the same time not too, too rude or rough. So I outlined her eye features, I outline with a fine line pen her nostrils, and now adding shadows with brown pencil, adding highlights with white ink pen. I usually like adding this freckle-like highlights, but it all depends. Like, you can also just apply, like, put a spot with white ink pen and smudge it to add highlights. If you like it more as it is in real life. Okay, now working with your eyebrows. Next, I'm using Cool Gray 5. For her hair, let's just define first the shape of her head. And since she has like short hair, it will be almost the same as the outline of the head. If you want like more contrast, you can use some dark brown. Like for the light skin, we use lilac pencil, like purple pencil. And for darker skin tones, we use dark brown. And very seldom we use black pencil. And now I'm applying Cool Gray 5, like with the dots on her hair. Every time you render any texture, try to think about what does the surface resemble. Does it resemble like many dots or some circular objects? Or it's something that resembles like mixed threads that maybe you will scribble. In this case, it's more like tiny circles, so that's why I'm applying marker with dots. And on the top of Cool Gray 5, I'm adding some black dots. Try to make thick groups of black dots. And sometimes I add some highlights on the neck with the fast dynamic lines. So like for any white t-shirts or shirts, I like starting with a blender, and I usually work with 2 extra markers, Cool Gray 2, with which I add some darker depressions of the fabric. If there are any folds, I show them with Cool Gray 2. And the next one is Ice Gray 1, is a marker that just makes certain area that is slightly less lit grayish, and is the main color for white t-shirts. So the white t-shirts that I draw, they're not absolutely white. They are blender plus Ice Gray 1. So it's important to work fast, because when you apply the layer with blender, it takes maybe 10 seconds for it to dry absolutely. So within that 10 seconds, you have to apply all the things that you want to apply. Otherwise, you need to use Blender one more time. So you can see anything that is dark is cool gray 2, and anything that is a bit grayish is ice gray 1. I'm using white ink pen to define the color. And for the rest, I'm going to use the pencil. Buttons. I'm coloring the button with cool gray 2. So applying blender on the other bigger part of the shirt that is actually supposed to be under the lace. And not waiting too long, I'm starting working with cool gray 2, showing anything that is more darker than any other shadow on the shirt. Any big wrinkles, the outline along the jacket, so to show the shadows. And you can always reapply the blender if the surface gets dry. And then I'm working with ice gray 1, just giving this shirt a bit very soft gray. When you apply, when there is a blender, any marker will be lighter than it actually is. Also pay attention at which point you're applying marker. If you're applying when blender is super wet, then your marker will be light. When you're applying close to it's like being absolutely dry, then it will be darker. So more you know your tool, as I told you before, more you can work with it. So while tan is still wet, I'm applying shale, then more of the tan. So I'm using this like liquid on the surface to mix my markers. So more of the shale. I've got some shadows under the shirt, some tan. And we know that in the low leg, the most shiny part is the bone. So I need to draw that a bit curvy path in the middle of the low leg. So let me just wet the surface with the lightest marker that I'm using, which is tan. And then I'm working with the shale, showing the bone, adding more of the tan. Shale. If you have the legs under the skirt, even if a bit see-through skirt, you can make the legs a bit darker because they still receive less light than the open surface. And the tan, a bit more of the shale. And the second leg. So shale, just defining the darkest parts, then a lot of tan, wetting the surface, adding more shale on the borders. More of that tan. Okay, so coloring the whole area with the lace with warm gray one. So you can use cool gray one as well. Just one layer of very light fabric. I would color maybe some gray chiffon in the same way. So we're building the background on which we are drawing the lace. And here I'm drawing some floral motif. I'm following actually on the top, I'm following the pattern that I see on the reference image. But then later on the skirt, it's hard to define what's there. And then I just come up with the pattern based on what I drew here. So as you can see, there are many branches that connect different objects on the pattern. There are some petals that have only a thick outline but are empty inside. But there are also some petals of the flowers, as that one on the bottom that has petals with some. We just missed the part where I'm showing how to draw this web-like strokes, but you can always come back and just take a look. I'm using thin fine liner here, just making many lines and drawing. They look like bricks, I don't know, something like that. And as I told you, some of the petals are empty. I'm filling them with ice gray 4 or any dark gray, but some of them are partially colored with a fine liner, as the flower at the bottom, as you can see. But we still color the empty parts with some dark gray. And I'm going to draw pattern based on what I drew before. Here it's important to draw some bigger objects and some smaller objects to have some variety. And also try to connect different parts with each other. Maybe draw longer stems and draw some branches, add leaves between the flowers. It will make the whole composition a bit richer. So, and always use references, because you might not follow reference, but you will understand how the pattern interacts within it with different details. So how they're connected. So now I'm just sometimes following the pattern that I see, sometimes just come up with something similar. And for the pattern that I'm drawing right now, I'm using thicker fine line pen. If you use a Sakura Micron, then you can use 0.5, 0.8 nips. And for the lines between the pattern, for that web, I'm using 0.05. You can use 0.03. It just should be a much thinner fine line pen than the one that you use for the pattern. It should be hardly visible. So she has these lace pockets. That's why I'm drawing the pattern on the top of her hands. That's always the same thing with any patterned texture. Technically, it's not difficult to draw. It's just difficult to make yourself stay there, because we are a spoiled generation that really cannot focus, cannot dedicate time for something repetitive. So at a certain point it just becomes boring to draw all this lace. But technically it's not that difficult. You even don't have to draw perfect flowers. You just draw symbolic flowers. You need to draw them a bit in a bit imperfect way. So they look like icons, like just signs, but at the same time you need to make them a bit imperfect, asymmetrical, not uniform everywhere. Okay, let's draw with the hemline. And here I'm messing it up a little bit because I don't want it to be perfect like wave. But I think it's fine because we're going to draw a pattern, and there is also the back part of the skirt, so it won't be visible in the end what I've done here. So I divided the folds, and I will add some flowers at the bottom. Really, it doesn't matter where you start working from. Sometimes when it's super boring, I just finish the pattern in the middle, go to the other part, and just wait till those two patterns meet each other. So now I'm using Cool Gray 5 to define the back hemline and to draw the pattern at the back. So it's other half of the skirt that is at the back. So we're in the like we're seeing the back part of that pattern. So you just repeat the same motif. You just do it with Cool Gray 5. Because if you draw it just on the surface, it will look too artificial, because the back side of the skirt will be obviously empty. So we need to have this thickness. And then keep drawing the pattern. It's also, as I told you before, it's good to have variety between bigger and smaller objects. And if you see any pattern on a real design, try to draw the objects a bit bigger. So first of all, really, when you redraw a design, it's more about the quality of the rendering, not the size of the pattern. And if you make it a bit bigger, it will be almost the same, but for you it will be easier to fill in the space a bit faster. So now you can see that those flowers actually occupy quite a lot of space. And in between I'm adding the branches, the leaves. And actually in between I have some cups of tea and walking, because it's true, like whenever it's floral, get ready for some patience time. So many details. Another patience challenge for me, actually, the sound recording part, because I usually see the video that is like 50 minutes long. So I'm like, okay, I have to talk for 50 minutes. And well, I wouldn't like to listen to myself for 50 minutes. And I don't know how you do that. If you reach till this point and you're still listening, like, wow. I thought that you were like just muted and listening to music. But you probably believe that I'm carrying some super important information. So let me be as precise in explanation as I can. Well, you see that flower on the top, like between your legs? As I told you before, sometimes I color petals partially. And here you see I completed the pattern and it looks awesome, but here the pattern is not fantastic. It's not like I drew some crazy flowers or something. It's just the quantity and variety what makes it. And as I told you before, it's important to draw some, like to differ the thickness of lines. So when you draw the petals of flowers, you make them not of a uniform thickness of line, if it makes sense. I'm using Ice Gray 4, just adding shadows along your legs. Also, if you have any folds, and it's easier to judge if you have any by the hemline, you can see that I have some wrinkles there at the bottom. So Cool Gray 5 works better to show some really deep folds. So I'm using it. Then you can add some shadows along the jacket. And darken a bit your hands. Okay. So again, Ice Gray 4. Just want to make that white shirt a bit darker. And now I'm drawing all that web that we drew in the upper part. So I draw lines that make many sticks inside. If you have some objects that are very close, like this flower and leaves, you can connect them with the lines first and then just fill the area between with the strokes. So that's how the lace works. Okay, once you've finished, let's start working with your jacket, and I'm using Blender. We always use Blender for the leather. And next I'm working with Cool Gray 5. Cool Gray 5 is almost black. Whenever you have a black garment, you probably are gonna work with Cool Gray 5. Unless it's some pitch black, totally light absorbing fabric. So, well, if you're like, what are you talking about? Then I'm talking about just the case when you are drawing a person that is not in a super lit atmosphere, like maybe in the cinema like room, and that person is wearing black velvet. Then the black velvet might look like pitch black, and you don't need Cool Gray 5. But now you're using Cool Gray 5, and as you can see, blends are dried. So when I'm applying Cool Gray 5 on the top of Cool Gray 5, it just looks like black almost. plus its extra layer. Next, ice gray 1. So what markers I'm using here? I'm using cool gray 5, I'm using black, I'm using blender, ice gray 1, maybe ice gray 4, cool gray 2. First of all, like this is ice gray 4. I try to work faster so markers blend into each other. Bit of I guess ice gray 1. So it's all about building a nice transition from dark to light. A bit of black to show super dark shadows under your color, within those folds. With the leather, we just try to achieve a nice gradient towards some top of the wrinkles. Because leather is super smooth, and I try to mix ice gray and cool gray. It just, as any reflective fabric, leather reflects surroundings, and surroundings are not uniform. They might have some warm and cold hues. So I'm just trying to make all the shapes that are light to be more to adapt to, just to build this gradient. Well, you know what I mean. I think so, because basically we do similar things in every tutorial. We build the transitions, we show highlights, we show the shadows. Here I'm showing sort of a drop folds, a bit stretched ones, with cool gray 5 first, then using cool gray 2, and again cool gray 5. And as you can see, just like for the loop fold, I showed the shape of the loop. You have this drop shadow, and you have that surrounding shadows, that triangle between two drop loops, like between two loop folds. Yeah. And some black. Be careful with black. Add it only where you're sure that there should be dark, like some overlapping or some really deep shadows or holes. Yeah. Here we have the sleeve. Cool gray 2. Ice gray 4. Work a bit faster so those two mix a bit. And showing the thread lines with a fine line pen. If you have the marker that went outside the outline and you feel it looks bad, you can correct it with white ink gel pen. And if you feel like you don't have enough of a contrast, you can add extra with a black pencil. You can make those folds deeper, darker. And you can add a bit of some tint like blue or any other tint if you feel so with oil pencil or wax pencil, because it's applied as a rich color and it's applied smoothly. So here we need to show the zipper. I'm showing the thread line, and same here, just like a bit away from the edge. And on the white background, I'm showing the zipper with a pencil, and on the dark background, I'm showing it as many tiny dashes with a white ink gel pen. And yeah, and here showing the zipper, how you call it in English, that part that you drag. You can add just a bit of details with a basic pencil. Alright, so happy with it. And next, covering the color with Cool Gray 2, adding some Cool Gray 5. When applying Cool Gray 2, you can just leave a bit of highlights if you want to. If you forgot, it's okay. And then adding some stronger shadows, especially in the inner part of the color with black pencil. And we have this thread line on her shoulder. And the buttons. Adding some details inside, you can add two circles, like one around and one in the center with a fine line pen. So you can start with the darker. The order is not that important, like the darker marker or the lighter marker. It's just important to apply it where it's needed. You can, if you have some huge shadow areas, you can apply them first. It's fine, as long as you keep the highlights untouched, or you have those like elongated highlights untouched. Because here we have this huge jacket, it's quite wide for her pose, so it's a bit wrinkled, and it has these long vertical folds. Just because it's longer than her shoulders, it's longer than the distance between her arms, and that's why it looks like that. So I'm using Cool Gray 5 still, adding shadows on the collar, under the collar, and showing all those thread wrinkles with tiny dots. Then I'm working with the ice gray one. Working with Cool Gray 2 because the ice gray one is a bit too light. And I'm just trying to blend the edges of these dark parts. And more I color, more I make that part wet. So next I'm using a bit darker marker, it will blend better. So now I'm adding a bit of Cool Gray 5, and it's blending in previous Cool Gray 2 that I was working with a lot. I usually do not communicate any like current events in the tutorials, because at certain point they will be irrelevant when person watches it, maybe in 2025. But some of you asked about the cover image for the Patreon, and this can be a retro news in the future, but it's coming out very soon, because for some of you, I have the idea of drawing them separately, like separate sketches, and then just adding them together. So this weekend I definitely will finish everything. So I hope your excitement is still on fire. So cool gray 5 more. The main idea, you can use like maybe different numbers of gray, like you might have cool gray 3, some cool gray 1, but the main idea here is just to mix these markers so you have very smooth transition from super light grays to super dark grays and to the black. Because lead is like that, it reflects, it absorbs some light and it smoothly reflects the light. It's not like PVC or patent leather where you can have clear white and the rest. So that's why we're using blender, because we need to blend. So now adding shadows with black pencil. If you need to highlight some thin area, you can use white ink pen, just like I'm using it right now. So here we have extra thread line. And this hemline. And some wrinkles and some highlights on those wrinkles you can show with white ink pen. And we're left with your left side sleeve. I'm covering it with a blender, and then again starting with cool gray 5, showing the deep wrinkles, any shadows that we have here. So we have some wrinkles that resemble loop wrinkles. Then we have this wrinkle at your elbow, because the fabric is like the arm is bent and the fabric has this wrinkle. Adding some black. So as I told you before, always analyze any wrinkles and folds. Like, why it's like that? And your brain just remembers everything. So next time you draw, you know how to recreate some sorts of folds and wrinkles. Again, adding some blender because everything is dry already. Some ice gray 4. And on the blender it's applied much lighter. But you can still layer and layer, and blender bit by bit dries, so your marker eventually becomes dark. And I'm using white ink pen for any highlights. And even when you work with white ink pen, you can make dots, you can make lines, you can smudge the pen. More you use the tool, more you know how to manipulate it. So adding the nail polish, and just try to draw very flat shapes, because we're looking at the fingers from the front and not seeing the whole plate of the nails. And again, I'm not showing the whole squares for the spikes, just adding some maybe L shapes or L with some cross inside. Cross, yeah. And yeah, because the spikes do not evenly reflect the light, so please watch in a full screen mode so you can see everything, because I think by language is not enough to express. And the last step, I'm using black pencil to draw similar pattern at the back, because I still feel that the back lacks the lace pattern. So, and we're done with this look. I hope that you enjoyed the tutorial and learned something new for yourself. Please share your questions and suggestions, and I really appreciate suggestions, because I really want to know what else we can draw together in the next tutorial. So see you very soon. Have a nice day, and thank you for supporting and being my patron.